Hey guys, I'm going to talk today about European empires in the Americas, um, how Europeans built their empires in the Americas from 1450 to 1750. So let's get started. Okay, this presentation was made by by Mr. Adamson. You can find his work at adamsonadventure.com. Just so y'all know about that. That's another resource for you. Okay. So what we're going to look at today is we're going to explain how rulers employed economic strategies to consolidate and maintain their power throughout the period from 1450 to 1750. Okay, so how did they use economic strategies to consolidate their power? Then that's political power from 1450 to 1750. So we might have a lot of stuff in the economic box and in the political box, but there will be other stuff throughout this. We're going to hit on every theme, so you will fill out probably everything as we go through. Okay, so this shows global silver trade in the 17th century. So silver trade was huge, which becomes huge in Latin America, as you can see from this. There is silver mining becomes huge in Latin America, and a big reason um, that Spain is able to build an empire in the Americas. So, European colonization was based on economic theory called mercantilism. And the goal of mercantilism is economic gain to benefit the mother country. Okay, so you want economic gain to try to benefit the mother country, bring in gold and silver, food, raw materials, and it's mainly based on exports. They encourage exports over imports. That you should always your wealth as a country is based on how much you're exporting versus how much you're importing. So you want to be under mercantilism. You want to be kind of self sufficient and not have to import a lot of things, and you want to be able to export as much as possible. So a big part of mercantilism is the accumulation of what's called bullion, which is gold and silver. It's basically like raw materials, precious metals, and as far as raw materials go. So gold and silver are the big ones. These precious metals that that are extremely extremely important around the world and extremely valuable in trade in the 1400s 1600s. So they extracted raw materials from their colonies, which we kind of talked about before, and then they brought finished goods and services that are sold and traded to the colonies. So they extract raw materials from the colonies and then use those raw materials to make manufactured goods of some sort, whether that's guns or clothes or whatever. And then they send it back to the colonies. And so not only do you have a market to get your raw materials from, you now have a market to send your exports to. Okay, so you're so you're exporting these finished goods and services to the colonies, making money that way. You're also getting raw materials really cheaply from the colonies. So the colonies are doing work for you in both ways. New World colonies expanded the mother country's economy, whether it's France, Spain, Portugal, the Netherlands, or England. They're expanding that country's economy and tilts the balance of power in the world toward Europe. So this is why European countries become so powerful in this time period, 1450 to 1750, and they become the most the most powerful region in the world. Europe becomes the most powerful region in the world pretty much by far, because these colonies in the New World make their economies so powerful, because they're using these colonies, they're exploiting these colonies for their raw materials and using them as a market for their finished goods as well, when they're when they're done with what they're doing with raw materials. So that is that is a huge reason for why these European countries become so powerful at this time. All right. Let's just go back. Go back. Okay, another big part of this, specifically in England and the Netherlands, are what are called joint stock companies. So, in a lot of these empires, you have pretty much the crown, the royal, the government itself, the royal government, in charge of everything, pretty much in Spain, in in France, the royal government's pretty much in charge of everything, and they have pretty much all the power to do whatever they want. In England and the Netherlands, you have these joint stock companies, which hold most of the power. Joint stock companies were large privately owned trading companies. So these are not government entities. They're not even extensions of the government. They're privately owned trading companies that have that have a contract with the government to do trade. Investors bought stock in the company. They took on risks in the hopes of earning high returns from exploration and trade. So they're investing in these companies to try to get these high returns from from the trade that they'll be doing. And it removed the requirement of state-sponsored voyages, although they did have state support. So where beforehand in Portugal, Spain, all this, they have state-sponsored voyages. In England and in the Netherlands, you have you don't have to have these state-sponsored voyages. The government is not doing all this. These privately traded companies are controlling the Atlantic trade, or Pacific trade, or whatever. Um, Whatever, Pacific trade isn't quite happening yet, but trade with Asia, whatever we're doing. Okay, Indian Ocean trade. I should have said that. So, uh, so you don't have to have these state-sponsored voyages anymore, but they did have state support because they had these contracts with the government to trade in these places. So this is an important emergence in early capitalist society, where you have a lot of these companies are based in mercantilism. This is kind of an early capitalism, which is a different economic system that's happening in England and the Netherlands. The two main players here are the English East India Company, okay, or the British East India Company, and its Dutch counterpart, which Dutch is from the Netherlands. Okay, the Netherlands is the country, the Dutch are the people. Um, so the Dutch counterpart for for the English or British East India Company is the Dutch East India Company, which is also called the VOC, Verenigde Oost-Indische Compagnie. I probably butchered that pretty bad, but it's that's what it stands for, and we just call it the VOC. Okay, all you gotta know is the VOC or Dutch East India Company. They're the exact same thing. Okay. Um, so you have the English East India Company and the Dutch East India Company, and they had charters with their government. They kind of like um, a contract with the government that allowed them to buy, sell, build trading posts, and make war in the company's best interests. So they have complete power in this area that they are given a contract to trade in. They can build things, they can buy and sell, and send it back to the home country, and they can make war, which is crazy. But that's what you see in India. That's what you see a little bit in the United States. But these trading companies are extremely powerful. All right. Oops. Okay. So this shows the VOC, a little bit of a picture in the background, and then their logo kind of in the front, and then the British or English East India Company. All right. So then, so that's what's kind of happening in Asia. Asia is where these uh, joint stock companies have huge have huge power. But then you have the Atlantic economy, which which is doing a little bit different. Um, so in the Atlantic economy, you have triangular trade. And in this triangular trade, they're experimenting with new labor systems here. So how labor is done, who's doing the labor, those sorts of things. Is it paid or not paid? Those sorts of things. There's some experimentation with new things here. There's new, and one of those, of course, is slavery, Atlantic slavery, which becomes way different than any slavery that existed before. There's also new methods of transportation, like the caravel, which makes these long distance voyages possible across the Atlantic Ocean. Um, and they have sort of an early capitalistic enterprise, but we're calling that mercantilism, that that is kind of fueling all this. All of this combined to create a new network of sea routes. Okay, so all of these countries that are going across the Atlantic Ocean, they create a new network of sea routes. One is from Europe to Africa, and from Europe to Africa goes guns, textiles, and manufactured goods. So the guns are traded a lot for slaves, but as are textiles, which are fabrics, clothes, stuff to make clothes, and manufactured goods, all sorts of things that you might, other manufactured goods, guns and textiles fit in that too. Okay, I'm going blank on exactly what that is, but but there are other manufactured goods sent from Europe to Africa, stuff that the Europeans are making from the raw materials that they're getting from North America and South America, which we'll talk about in a second. Then the Middle Passage is going from Africa to the Americas, and you might have heard of the Middle Passage in reference to the slave trade before. And this is just the the passage, the trade route going from Africa to the Americas. Enslaved Africans were brought to the Americas, and they brought, that's in quotation marks because it's not like they had stuff to bring, but with these Africans came foods such as okra and rice. So these new foods are brought to the Americas by the slaves. Um, you know, and then from the New World to Europe, goods are produced in the New World, like or goods produced in the New World included raw materials. So it's basically raw materials being sent from the New World to Europe, and then in Europe they're made into manufactured goods and then sent to either back to the colonies in the Americas or to Africa. Um, but some of those raw materials include sugar, which is huge in the Caribbean and in South American societies. Tobacco, mainly in the American South, but also other places within the Americas. Cotton, again, American South, is a bunch of that. Rice, which I think is in South America. Gold and silver, which is mainly in South America, but a little bit in North America or Central America as well. Um, so so you've got you've got all these raw materials coming from North and South America and the Caribbean, and those are going to Europe, and then the whole triangle starts again. Um, Ships also cross the Pacific, taking especially silver to places like Manila, which was the capital of the Spanish colony of the Philippines. Uh, and they traded silver for Asian luxury goods there. So it's not just Atlantic trade that's happening. There are ships crossing the Pacific as well. But we read about that in Born with a Silver Spoon. In that article I had you read. So that silver trade from Spain to Asia to get these luxury goods, that is still happening, and it's a huge part of trade as well. They're not just taking the silver back to Europe; they're trading it with China and Japan as well. All right. Due to the presence of the Incas and the Mexica, which is a native tribe around in where Mexico is today, the Spanish and Portuguese colonized the the wealthiest lands of the New World. Sorry, I forgot for a second. The Mexica is actually the name for the Aztecs. So the Mexica and the Aztecs are actually the same people. Um, uh, they, I believe they actually called themselves the Mexica. If I remember right, if I'm remembering my details right, the Spanish called them the Aztecs. So so they so the Spanish and Portuguese colonized the wealthiest lands in the New World, the ones that had been taken over or had been uh, controlled by the Mexica or the Aztecs and the Incas. And they established cities, churches, and universities well before the British colonized North America. So they so the Spanish are around for a lot longer than the British were, and the Spanish colonies are a lot older than that. Wealth was in commercial agriculture and silver mining, so that's where they get a lot of their most of their money from. Is from commercial agriculture like sugar plantations, cotton plantations, coffee plantations, those sorts of things, and in silver mining. Silver mining is huge in these Latin American colonies. They use two different labor systems. You do not need to know the difference between these, even though there is a difference between them. But they use two different labor systems called the encomienda and the hacienda. Uh, and these were labor systems that had large estates that employed native workers. Um, and and they use native workers rather than African workers, but it is still slavery. This is another type of slavery using plantations, using these large estates that are employing native workers, and by employing we mean forcing native workers to work on their land. And this is again another form of slavery. It's it's just not using African workers and slave trade across the Atlantic, but it's using native workers, uh, native tribal people that were there before, whether or people who were part of major states before, like the Incas and the Mexica, and and using those native people as free labor essentially. So those were called the encomienda and the hacienda labor systems. If I find out that you need to know the difference between those, um, I will share that with you. But as far as I know, just know that both of those are essentially another form of slavery using native workers on plantations or large estates in the Americas. All right, new social hierarchies emerged in New Spain meaning Latin America, where the Spanish have control in North and South America. Um, and it's based, these new social hierarchies are based on race and birth location. So at the top of this social hierarchy, you have the peninsulares. The peninsulares are Spaniards who were born in Spain. Okay, Spaniards born in Spain. Um, so if you were not born in the New World, you had the highest possible social status here. Right below them, or sorry, they had the most power, the most land, the most political authority, and they looked to Spain for guidance, but they largely saw themselves as unique and independent, that they were independent of the mother country, and they kind of did their own thing. Um, Then right below them are the Creoles. The Creoles were the children of the Peninsulares, but they were, and this is important, they were born in New Spain. Okay, they were born in New Spain. They were born in the New World in North or South America. They were not uh, born in Spain. The Peninsulares, that's born on the peninsula, on the peninsula that has Spain, which is called the Iberian Peninsula. That's where you get the word peninsulares from. But the Creoles were uh, were born in New Spain of Spanish parents. Now, why would they care where you were born? Well, if you were born in Spain, maybe you were seen as more civilized than if you were born in the New World. But also, it's important to know that if you were born in New Spain, whether you had two Spanish parents or not, um, they essentially they uh, they it is doubtable where your parentage comes from, because if you were born in New Spain, maybe you had a native parent instead of instead of it being the actual person that your mom or dad is married to, right? The point is, if they consider these people who are these natives to be natives and Africans to be lesser than them, then if you live around natives and around Africans, it's possible that that could be in your DNA somewhere, right? So, so the Creoles were a little bit below the Peninsulares, the they're assumed to be of Spanish heritage. They're just born in New Spain, born in the New World, rather than in Spain itself. All right. Now, a lack of Spanish women meant that mixed race children were also included in the social hierarchies, but they were below Peninsulares and Creole. So we have what are called mestizos, um, which were born of Spanish and Native American Indian parents. Um, and so if you had partial Spanish heritage, partial Native heritage, um, then you would be in this mestizo class. Now, this was seen as being below the others because the natives were not considered to be in the same social class as the Spanish were. So if you're of mixed heritage, you're in this mestizo class, right? Another one, which is another word that we don't really use today to describe these people as kind of below the mestizos, were the what are called mulattoes. Okay, mulattoes were mixed Spanish and African children. So if you were born of Spanish person and an African person, you would be called a mulatto. Now we don't use the word mulatto today because it has been used over time to degrade people, um, and talk about their mixed race heritage. So this is a purely historical word, not something that we use in any sort of conversation, any non historical conversation. Um, Native American Indians were below them. So if you were pure Native American, if you were pure Indian, is what they called them, then you would be then you would be below the mestizos and the mulattoes. And then enslaved people brought from Africa and the Caribbean, and these would be black people, would be below those Native Americans as well. All right. Let's see. Okay, so this new social hierarchy was shown um, in in Costa paintings. Okay, and these Costa paintings we're going to look at in more detail later in the week. Um, but these Costa paintings kind of prescribed the different levels of social hierarchy depending on you are, because it's not, after you get multiple generations of this, it's not that clean anymore. um, it's not like oh, this person is of they're of mixed heritage. Yes, if they have one Spanish parent and one native parent, then yes. But then what about someone who has a mestizo parent and a Spanish parent? Where are they in the social hierarchy? The Spanish had answers for all of this, and they had names for basically what percentage Spanish you were versus what percentage native you were versus what percentage African you were, and you were in a different part in the social hierarchy if you were any number of these, right? So we'll look at this in a little bit more detail later in the week, but just it's a very prescribed social hierarchy where basically the whiter you are, the more Spanish heritage you are, the higher you are on the totem pole, and the more native or African ancestry you have, the lower you are on this social hierarchy. So again, this is a racist idea of of genetics, meaning you know how capable you are in society. It's a very stratified social hierarchy, meaning that your power in New Spain is not based on anything you've done, pretty much, but who your parents are and what genetics you have, what color your skin is a huge part of it. So this creates this creates um, lots of inequity and inequality throughout New Spain, and you know that's and it still has ramifications today. All right, let's see. European women in New Spain. So in New Spain, it's also a patriarchal society, which means that the father has authority over his children. Women couldn't hold political positions. They couldn't run a plantation or work in the mines. Women did control their own dowry, which means the money that a man got for marrying them, they did control that. Uh, and they ran a business after their husbands died, so they did have some possibility of control there, and especially some economic rights. And women also had full rights to inheritance as well, which is good. Um, but European women were considered bearers of civilization, which means their main point was birthing legitimate children to their husbands. So they transmitted male wealth, honor, and status by birthing legitimate children, children born in wedlock, born in marriage to their husbands. And that was considered their most important contribution to society. Purity of the blood was a concern, especially, given what we just learned about Costa paintings, especially in New Spain. Purity of blood is definitely a concern. And in Spain, the concern was Muslim and Jewish mixing. Um, in on the peninsula of Spain, but in the New World, mixing with Africans or indigenous people is what they're concerned with. So both in Spain and in the New World, you have this idea of we want to make sure that the blood is pure, that there's not any of these any of these this mixing of different ethnicities, you know, in the bloodline. Okay, so since they were born on the Iberian Peninsula, which is Spain and Portugal, Peninsulares were most likely to have purity of the blood, and then it goes down from there. Again, that's one of the reasons why the Creoles, even though they supposedly have two Spanish parents, are lower because they're not as likely to actually have pure blood. Natives in New Spain were at the bottom of the social hierarchy. Their populations were destroyed by disease. They were used as a labor force for agricultural labor and mining in what we said the hacienda and encomienda systems. They were forced to convert to Christianity by missionaries, and some converted willingly to be more accepted by Spanish society. So you do see some natives in New Spain that are converting willingly to Christianity. The Spanish refused to recognize female property or inheritance rights. The Christian saints blended with indigenous gods to create new syncretic beliefs. So it wasn't just this pure Christianity that comes into the New World. They're blending with indigenous gods and indigenous ideas to create these syncretic Christian beliefs. Then the Tupac Amaru revolt in Peru in 1780 showed indigenous peoples were unhappy and willing to defend their traditions. It's a revolt in Peru the Peruvian natives um, uh, started a revolt against the Spanish government, and they were willing to defend their traditions and their ways of life, as against the Spanish kind of trying to take over and change everything. The Tupac Amaru revolt was unsuccessful, but it did show the willingness of Native people to fight back against oppression from New Spain or from the Spanish. Let's see, we're not going to talk about that. Okay, the British, they came to North America too. They arrived late and got kind of the leftovers of the New World. They arrived from England, which had experienced Protestant and Catholic conflicts, as well as the creation of a parliament, which checked the power of the king. and Puritans and Quakers wanted to escape old European society rather than recreate it, unlike those who were settling in New Spain. So they wanted to they wanted to escape these the European society and basically create a new society instead of just recreating what they had in Britain. Less class, or sorry, there were less class hierarchies in British North America than there were in the Spanish and Portuguese settlements. So you have a little bit more equality here, less of the stratified social hierarchy, but there's still obviously going to be some of that. Men had more freedom in the New World, while women still lived within the patriarchal confines of society in the New World. All right. More British settled in North America than Spanish settlers in Central and South America. So more people come actually from Britain than people who come from Spain. So that means you have a lot more Europeans settling in North America than you do in South America. A lot of South America is still natives and slaves, and sorry, I should say, and Africans who have been enslaved by the Spanish. Um, Amerindian populations were decimated through disease and warfare. So you have a lot more Europeans versus natives in North America. Less slaves were needed because many farms were small scale and independent. And so both of these led to less racial mixing. And they weren't so concerned about this pure blood idea like the Spanish and the Portuguese had. There's no creation of a similar casta system in North America, and most settlers were Protestant, and they were not as interested in converting native peoples. There was more promotion of literacy in North America. Church and state were not as closely connected either. There was a lot more separation between government and religion, and there's a stronger tradition of local self government instead of basically control by the crown or other people. Okay, all right, that is all I have time to do. So we're going to stop there. Everybody should have a good amount of stuff that you just put on your pieces charts. Y'all have a good day.